Hey there, I'm Chris Cillizza, CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large. Now, last week, the House Judiciary Committee held its first hearing featuring 4 law professors. Most of them were Democratic invited witnesses who presented arguments in favor of the impeachment of Donald Trump. They argued that President Trump had abused his office and committed several impeachable offenses that did in fact reach the level of high crimes and misdemeanors, as well as a little thing called obstruction of justice. Now, the sole witness that was called by Republicans, though, argued the opposite. He said that the legal case to impeach Trump was, quote, woefully inadequate, and added that it was even, quote, dangerous. Now, before the next round of impeachment hearings, we asked you what you wanted to know about the hearings and about the impeachment process more generally. And now, I'm going to answer those most pressing questions. Here we go! Sean McDowell asked, will the Senate hearing be solely based upon the evidence documented by the House, or will other information outside of the impeachment hearings be presented? Good question, Sean. So remember this. Think of it as a legal proceeding. The House portion of it is essentially the investigation and charging element of it. The Senate trial is like a trial. Both sides get to present any evidence that they feel to be relevant. Now, Chief Justice John Roberts, the head of the Supreme Court, will oversee all of this, and he'll eventually get to make those calls. But yeah, my guess would be we will see some things that didn't come up in the House impeachment investigation come up in the trial in the Senate. Jim Matheson, at Jim Matt, said, quote, how many GOP senators will have to flip? So I assume, Jim, the question there is how many Republican senators would have to vote to remove Donald Trump from office in order for him to be, removed from office? And the answer to that question is 20. Assuming that the 47 Democrats and independents who caucus with Democrats all vote to remove Donald Trump, you would then need 20 more to get to the 67, a super majority of the Senate that the Constitution outlines must be present in order for a president to be removed. So 20, and that, yes, is a lot, and that's why it's unlikely. A popular question we got from lots of different people, asked in only slightly different ways, was like this one from Bob Newman, who goes by @BobNewman61 on Twitter. Are there Republican senators who might otherwise vote for impeachment if it were a secret ballot? Jim Polo Sr. asked a similar question. Is there any chance that there could be a procedural change where secret paper ballots would be used? Okay, great question. And the answer is yes, there is a way. So the only thing that the Constitution lays out specifically as it relates to a Senate impeachment trial are this. 2 things. 1, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court oversees the trial. And 2, in order to remove an impeached person, you need 67 Senate votes to do it. Everything else, in terms of the rules, is governed by what the Senate wants at that moment. So in the last impeachment, that of Bill Clinton, Senate Republicans and Democrats agreed on a set of rules that passed almost unanimously. That seems less likely to happen this time given the nature of partisanship, but it is possible that a handful of Republican senators, you'd only need 3, could say, we won't vote for the broader rules package governing this impeachment trial unless it includes secret ballots. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. Juan Vasquez, at Mega Chigurh, is wondering, if everything goes as planned, Trump gets impeached, convicted, found guilty, pardons himself and his people, he still has other charges pending. Will they persecute him to the full extent of the law? I'm going to assume you mean prosecute there, not persecute. But the answer to that is, we know that the Justice Department has said that they're following the guidelines long established that a sitting president cannot be indicted for a crime. So no, they will not be prosecuting Donald Trump for anything unless and until he leaves office. Now, if that happens in 2021, could they? Sure. If it happens in 2025, could they? Sure. Will they? I think that's very, very unlikely. Now, another big question we get about impeachment is, how does it impact Trump's bid for a second term? Princess Glammy, at Princess Glammy, great job branding, wants to know this. What are the rules regarding an impeached and removed president running for a second term? Can he really be voted back into office if the Senate found him guilty? And then there's this from Lauren Scotts, at Lauren Scotts, good job by you, said, quote, can an impeached president rerun for president in the future? The answer to that is Probably yes. Now remember, there are only two rules in the Constitution that govern Senate impeachment trials. One, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, in this case John Roberts, has to preside over the trial. And two, in order to remove an impeached person, you have to have 67 senators voting to do so. Everything else is kind of up to the Senate. So, unless the Senate voted to remove Donald Trump, and in that vote there was language that said, and he can never run for this office in the future, well, he could run for this office in the future. So what would happen is Donald Trump is removed, Vice President Mike Pence becomes president, and then Donald Trump could run for sort of a second term, whether or not Mike Pence liked it, in 2020 regardless. Again, unless the Senate specifically put in the language of the removal motion that he could not run again, which seems unlikely. Kelly Massey at Kelly_Massey asked, could Trump be impeached more than once? What happens if more corruption comes to light after he is impeached? Good question, Kelly. This doesn't work like the legal system, double jeopardy, charged for the same thing twice. Donald Trump could be impeached if there are articles of impeachment that get approved again in the House and there was a Senate trial again. This is a political process. It's just a good reminder as any that it is governed by the rules of politics. The House really and the Senate really set their own rules with very few light touches provided and guidance provided by the Constitution. So yeah, he could. But again, it's not going to happen. This next question is a big one. I answered it on my YouTube show this weekend with CNN legal analyst Laura Coates. She's wonderful. And it's about subpoenas being ignored by the Trump White House. At Perps Meow said, how can congressional subpoenas be ignored with no consequences? And Shai Mitchell wants to know, will the White House blocked witnesses be required to testify and the subpoena docs released? Jennifer DiMarzio, again along these lines, said, will Trump administration be allowed to ignore subpoenas from the Senate trial like they have in the House inquiry? And Sherry B. Weiss at Shaw Nudge B asked, if I was called, would I be allowed to say no? Okay, what Laura outlined in our conversation, and we're going to link to that so you can see the full conversation, but what's important to remember here is subpoenas technically aren't different if it's Congress or a legal proceeding. They're all subpoenas, and you're supposed to either turn over the documents requested or show up. But here's what's different. On the legal side, there's a clear penalty for not responding to a subpoena. They can throw you in jail. On the Congress side, they don't have the power to jail you. Could they appeal to the legal side in order to make that happen? Yes, they could. They don't usually. And so therefore, it's a lot easier to ignore a congressional subpoena than it is to ignore a criminal subpoena. And that's the difference right now. Yeah. Now, you might be asking at this point, well, why doesn't Congress appeal those subpoenas to the Justice Department to get the criminal penalties connected to them? Well, if you've not been on planet Mars for the last 5 years, you know that the Justice Department, particularly under Donald Trump, would likely reject such a claim, particularly from a Democratic Congress. They would not uphold that, and therefore a big amount of time would be wasted. Jeff Mickerath asked, are any of these witnesses allowed to plead the Fifth? Yes, they are. So you can't self-incriminate, right? You can't say things that eventually could be used to put you under lock and key. And so as a result, if you don't want to do that, you can resist. The issue, of course, when it comes to pleading the Fifth is it makes people think you might actually be guilty, that you're afraid of saying or answering questions that could put you in future legal peril. I still think Donald Trump is very unlikely to testify in a Senate impeachment trial, and this would be his way out of it. Jessica Lewis wants to know, how long will the Senate trial take, and will it hold up a lot of legislation and voting time? The answer to that is yes, it will hold up a lot of legislation and voting time. But the answer to your first question is, I don't know exactly how long it's going to take. There's no specific timeline laid out in the Constitution of how long or how short a Senate trial can be. I think both sides have an interest in making it be a week, maybe two, and probably not any shorter or longer than that. Pam Mitchell is curious, who are the key senators we should be looking out for or watching? That's a great question. Now, remember, this is not a simple majority to remove Donald Trump. 67 votes on the Senate side need to be for removal in order for it to happen, which means you need lots of Republicans to cross over. Who should you be watching in that group? I mean, I think the usual suspects at some level: Maine's Susan Collins, Alaska's Lisa Murkowski. I'd keep an eye on Ohio Senator Rob Portman, sort of an institutionalist. But let's say all of them, and maybe throw in Cory Gardner from Colorado, who's in a tough race, and Martha McSally from Arizona, who's in a tough race in 2020. That's 5. I'd keep an eye on them. But then you got to find 15 more, including all 47 Democrats, for this thing to happen. But look at those people who have been willing to criticize Donald Trump in the past. And then I'd also say on the Republican side, John Thune, who's a member of leadership but has been a little more, less rah-rah for Donald Trump. See what he does. Maybe that's an indication of whether leadership is at all wavering on how to vote on this. Kyle McKenzie asks this: how is Trump allowed to meet with the senators before the trial? Isn't that tampering? Aren't there laws against it? No, there aren't laws against it because, again, there's no reason to say Donald Trump can't meet with elected officials of his party or the other party. And this isn't a legal proceeding. I feel like it's really important to keep reminding yourself of that. I know when we use terms like investigation and charges and trial, there's a tendency to think this is the next episode of Law and Order. It's not necessarily. This is a political proceeding. Most of the rules are determined by the senators or by the House members, not by some other judicial group. Now, John Roberts, yes, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, is involved, but he's really litigating disputes, not setting the rules. So Donald Trump can largely do what he wants, short of promising campaign contributions, perhaps, to people who vote for him. David DeBrada is curious: is there a circumstance in which Mike Pence's vote on the impeachment question could matter? No, there isn't. Mike Pence's role as vice president is to break tie votes in the Senate, 50-50 votes. There's not going to be a tie vote in the Senate because unless 67 senators vote to remove Donald Trump, he's staying in office. Brett Uhlberg is curious: why wouldn't the Supreme Court be doing the hearings? It's like one branch versus the other branch of government. What happens with the third branch for input? Well, the Supreme Court is kind of doing the hearings in that John Roberts, the Chief Justice, is presiding. But remember, impeachment is a legislative check on the executive. It's not a judicial check on the executive. So, because of that, the Constitution outlines what the House and Senate should do. They're the only bodies that are allowed to impeach federal officials. Roberts is there, again, really to litigate disputes. His role is not as prominent, probably, as you assume it might be. Gabrielle Padilla is wondering, can the Senate throw out the case similar to how a judge dismisses a case due to lack of evidence? No. The Senate basically, if the case gets brought to them, has 2 options: remove the president or keep the president. That's it. So if they decide not to remove him, it's sort of like throwing the case out in that Trump goes back to being president as though nothing happened. So that's their alternative, but it's only one of 2 choices that they get as laid out by the Constitution. Lila Campion wants to know, will Trump be questioned? Well, sure, he could be questioned. He's certainly available to be called as a witness, but he could assert his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, that he doesn't want to talk about anything because he's worried about possible future prosecution, or he could exert executive privilege, that any conversation he would be asked about is governed under executive privilege, meaning he is not allowed to talk about it. So could he be questioned? Yes. Will he appear for questioning? I think that's very unlikely. Now, speaking about executive privilege, that's why people like acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani are resisting congressional subpoenas. They're essentially saying anything I would be asked about would have to do with conversations I had with the president about Ukraine or anything else, and therefore is not legal, so I'm not going to come and even present myself with that opportunity. Like what you're seeing here, I make YouTube videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and a special impeachment episode every weekend. If you like